Hello and welcome to my workshop. Today we're going to do a quick how-to video on a forward mount transmission plate using the SCX10 transmission and SCX10.2 frame. It's going to be a quick DIY how-to where we're going to make a small motor plate out of a thin piece of metal and a couple modifications to the transmission, and then get this thing in here so that you can have your motor forward, transmission up, and use a transfer case. So let's get started. So the first thing you want to do is modify your transmission. So you're going to essentially flip this transmission around, which is very simple for an SCX10. So just taking off the spur and all of the components, and then you take off all of the bolts that hold the motor plate and the transmission together, as well as dropping off the drive shafts. So now we've got everything stripped off the case. It's still kind of left together even though all the bolts are out. And then all we have to do is to pop off this outer piece here, separate the case, and it's just as simple as turning this around. You have to be careful about the bearing, and because sometimes the bearing stays in, sometimes it pulls out. And one of the things I want to do while I'm in here is just to feel for the bearing. Is that thing grinding or feels smooth? And this one feels really good. It has what appears to be an adequate amount of grease in. So I think I'm okay with that. I'll simply turn that around. I do a quick inspection on the rest of the gears, and it looks like there's hardly any wear at all in this transmission, so it's all good. And the case just goes back together. And then the way it's designed, you can just take this little plug, stick it on the other side. Now you flipped the transmission around, and that'll allow you to make the transmission sit into the chassis in this general vicinity right here. So depending on which transmission you get, which year, they're going to have different variations of this. So what I was able to do is just use some, I think these are actually axial spacers, little plastic spacers, to take up the distance of what is done here on this, this stock SCX10 motor plate. So the next modification needs to be made is this little rear section needs to be cut off of the servo mount, and the reason for that is it just adds a little bit of extra clearance for moving this forward, and it just has a little bit of fouling right there on that portion of the transmission. So if we remove that, we can get it forward just a little bit more and really free up some space for having a full interior, which is really the goal. Okay, now that we have our motor flipped around and a couple of the parts removed that we really don't need, the next step is really the core of this design, which is just nothing more than a piece of flat metal. So what I've done is I've taken one of the other ones I've designed, copied this on a piece of paper. I will put this as a file you can download in the link below. But it's really not that complicated to do, but it's, may save you a step or two. So I'm going to cut this out paste it onto a piece of metal and cut this shape out, and then drill in these holes to line up. And what that does is the 4 holes at the end made up with the transmission, and then the other 2 holes line up with points along the bodies. The only modification to the chassis you'll have to make is a small notch here at the bottom. So let's get started. So I don't have a ton of fancy metalworking tools. I have some basic stuff, and what I ended up doing is taking jigsaw with a metal cutting blade, rough cut out the shape that was transferred on with the paper template, and I'll go back with a grinder, and I'll just clean right up to the edge, and that'll give me my part. There is a little slight bend that you put into this, but you can do that while installing it into the chassis. So there you go, a nice quick little DIY how-to video for making a SCX10.2 forward mount transmission plate. As mentioned before, I will have a drawing of this in the link below, and I appreciate you watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you got something out of it. I'll see you on the rocks.